They called themselves the Architects of Silence, and for 500,000 years they had carved empires from the bones of dead civilizations. Across the galaxy, species whispered their name in terror. The Zephyrians, masters of biological warfare, who could strip a world of life with a single spore release. They had done it before. They had done it to Earth. But now, as Commander Vexthara stared at the blue marble hanging in the void, something felt wrong. The planet should have been barren, lifeless, a monument to their ancient victory. Instead, it pulsed with an energy that made their most advanced sensors scream warnings they didn't understand. 500,000 years ago, they had left Earth as a graveyard. What they found waiting for them would redefine the very meaning of survival, evolution, and the terrible price of underestimating humanity's will to endure. Some wounds never heal. Some species never forget, and some nightmares are just getting started. Commander Vexthara's 6 eyes focused on the tactical display with growing unease. The World Render, flagship of the Zephyrian Dominion's 9th Conquest Fleet, hung in the outer reaches of what the ancient star charts labeled as Sol System. Her chitinous fingers drummed against the command console, each tap echoing through the bridge like falling pebbles in a tomb. "Sensor Operative Krilluk, report on planetary status," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally overseen the extinction of 17 civilizations. The smaller Zephyrian at the sensor station shifted nervously, his bioluminescent patches flickering with uncertainty. "Commander, the readings are inconsistent with our records." Vexthara's mandibles clicked in annoyance. 500,000 years had passed since the Dominion's last visit to this backwater system. They had come then as young conquerors drunk on their first taste of interstellar warfare. Earth had been one of their earliest campaigns, a testing ground for their newly developed bioweapons. The humans had been primitive, barely capable of crude spaceflight, wielding weapons that seemed almost quaint in their simplicity. The mission had been routine: deploy the Crimson Spore, watch the ecosystem collapse, harvest any useful genetic material, and move on. Standard operating procedure for a species that showed promise but lacked the technology to pose any real threat. Earth's file had been marked as sterilized, archive only, and forgotten in the vast databanks of Dominion conquest records. Now, returning to conduct a routine resource survey of the dead system, Vexthara found herself staring at data that made no sense. "Define inconsistent," she growled. Krilluk's patches dimmed further. "The planet shows massive energy signatures, Commander. Electromagnetic emissions across multiple spectrums. The atmosphere reads as not just habitable, but more complex than our initial surveys indicated." "That's impossible. We deployed 15 Crimson Spore canisters across all major land masses. The biological cascade should have rendered the planet uninhabitable within 50 solar cycles." "Yes, Commander. That's what the records indicate." But what? Krilluk manipulated his console, and the main display shifted to show a real-time image of Earth. Where Vexthara expected to see the brown, lifeless husk of a thoroughly sterilized world, she found herself looking at swirling white clouds, vast blue oceans, and the distinct green-brown patches that indicated not just life, but thriving ecosystems. The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's bio-neural processors. Vexthara felt a chill run through her exoskeleton, something she hadn't experienced since her first combat deployment centuries ago. "Zorinthak," she called to her tactical officer, "what do our deep scans reveal about surface activity?" The burly Zephyrian's 4 arms moved across his console with practiced efficiency. Zorinthak had served under Vexthara for over 2 centuries, and she had never seen his usually steady demeanor crack. Now, his bioluminescent patches pulsed with what could only be described as concern. "Commander, I'm detecting artificial structures on a massive scale. Cities, infrastructure networks, energy grids that span entire continents. The electromagnetic chatter suggests not just a surviving population, but one that has achieved significant technological advancement." Vexthara's mind raced through the possibilities. Zephyrian bioweapons were designed to be absolute. The Crimson Spore didn't just kill, it rewrote the fundamental biochemistry of affected worlds, creating cascading ecosystem failures that made recovery impossible. She had personally witnessed its effects on dozens of worlds. No species had ever survived a full deployment. Perhaps another faction reached the system after our departure, suggested Science Coordinator Thisandra from her position at the analysis station. The hegemony of scales, or the Crystal Collective. They might have reseeded the planet. Negative, Zoranthok interrupted. I'm detecting residual traces of our original bioweapon signatures in the upper atmosphere. Whatever survived here lived through our deployment. The implications sent another chill through the bridge crew. If a species could survive crimson spore exposure and not only recover but advance technologically, the Dominion's entire doctrine of conquest would need fundamental revision. Initiate long-range communication protocols, Vexthara ordered. Standard first contact procedures. We need to understand what we're dealing with before proceeding. Her communications officer, a young Zephyrian named Kexus Valor, worked his controls with obvious nervousness. Commander, I'm detecting multiple communication networks across the planet. The complexity is unprecedented. It's as if the entire world is connected through overlapping information systems. Can you establish contact? I believe so, but Commander, the encryption protocols they're using are sophisticated. Far more advanced than what our historical records indicated this species possessed. Vexthara considered her options. Zephyrian doctrine called for immediate assessment and cataloging of any unexpected discoveries. If the humans had somehow survived and evolved beyond their previous limitations, the Dominion needed to know the extent of their capabilities before determining the appropriate response. Open a channel, she decided. Kexa Valor's manipulator appendages danced across his console. Channel established, Commander. Broadcasting on multiple frequencies using mathematical constants for universal recognition. The wait stretched for several minutes before the communications array crackled to life. When the response came, it wasn't what anyone on the bridge expected. This is Earth Defense Command. The voice was calm, professional, and spoke in perfectly translated Zephyrian. We have been monitoring your approach since you entered the outer solar system. Welcome back to Sol, Commander Vexthara of the World Render. We need to talk. The bridge erupted in shocked chittering. The humans not only knew they were coming, but had identified their ship and commander by name. More disturbing still, they seemed to be expecting this contact. Vexthara's training kicked in, suppressing her initial shock. How do you know our language? How do you know my identity? There was a pause before the human voice responded, and when it did, there was something that might have been amusement in the tone. Commander, we've had 500,000 years to study the wreckage you left behind. Your language, your technology, your biology, your tactics. We know quite a lot about the Zephyrian Dominion. Impossible. Our bioweapons would have prevented any recovery. The Crimson Spore is designed to be absolutely lethal to carbon-based life forms. Yes, it was quite effective. It killed approximately 97% of all life on Earth. But 3% survived, Commander, and we've been very busy during your absence. Vexthara felt her confidence beginning to erode. The casual way the humans spoke about near extinction, as if it were merely an inconvenience rather than a civilization-ending catastrophe, suggested a mindset she didn't understand. We wish to establish formal diplomatic contact, she said, falling back on standard protocols. Our records indicate your species was classified as pre-interstellar at the time of our last survey. We were. That's no longer the case. If you'd like to discuss the current situation, we suggest you accept our invitation to visit our orbital platforms. Your ship's sensors should be picking them up now. Thysasandra's head snapped up from her console. Commander, I'm detecting massive artificial constructs in high orbit around the planet. How did we miss them? Zurintak was frantically manipulating his tactical displays. They weren't there a moment ago. It's as if they just appeared. No, Krilla corrected, his voice tight with disbelief. They were always there. They were cloaked using some kind of technology that made our sensors interpret them as space debris or minor asteroids. The masking is so sophisticated that our systems didn't even register them as artificial until they revealed themselves. Vexthara stared at the tactical display as dozens of structures materialized around Earth. Space stations, orbital platforms, and what appeared to be defensive installations, all on a scale that dwarfed anything the Dominion had encountered from species at this level of development. Commander, The human voice continued. "We understand your surprise. It's been a very long time since we had visitors from the stars, but we always knew you would return eventually. We've been preparing for this conversation for 500,000 years." The weight of that statement settled over the bridge like a burial shroud. 500,000 years of preparation, 500,000 years of development, advancement, and quite possibly planning for revenge. "What are your intentions?" Vexthara asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "Our intentions? That's an interesting question, Commander. What were your intentions when you last visited our system?" Vexthara's mandibles clicked as she considered her response. Honesty seemed the most prudent course given the unexpected circumstances. Resource evaluation and planetary sterilization as per standard Dominion expansion protocols. "And now you've returned for what purpose?" "Routine resource survey of sterilized systems." There was another pause, longer this time. When the human spoke again, the tone had shifted to something colder, more calculating. "Commander, we'd like to invite you and a small delegation to one of our platforms. There's something we need to show you. Something that will help you understand what has happened here during your absence, and what it means for your future plans." Vexthara looked around her bridge, at the anxious faces of her crew. Every instinct developed through centuries of conquest was screaming warnings, but diplomatic protocols required investigation of unexpected sentient contact. "What assurances can you provide for our safety?" The human's response carried what was unmistakably a laugh. "Commander, if we wanted you dead, you would never have made it past the orbit of your star chart's outermost planetary body. But we don't want you dead. We want you educated. There are things you need to understand about what your people did here, and what we've become because of it." Vexthara weighed her options. Retreat would mean returning to Dominion High Command with an incomplete report about a potentially significant threat. Advance meant walking into a situation where humans somehow held all the advantages. Neither option was appealing. "Very well. I will bring a small diplomatic team to your platform, but I warn you, any hostile action against my delegation will result in immediate military retaliation from Dominion forces." "Understood, Commander. We'll transmit docking coordinates. And, Commander, bring your best scientists and historians. You're going to need them." As the communication ended, Vexthara found herself staring at a world that challenged everything she thought she knew about conquest, survival, and the nature of intelligent life itself. In 5 centuries of military service, she had never encountered a species that spoke of near extinction as a learning experience, or referred to mass genocide as the foundation for education. Whatever the humans had become during their 500,000 years of isolation, they were no longer the primitive species the Dominion had encountered so long ago, and from the tone of their communications they had not forgotten who was responsible for the greatest catastrophe in their planet's history. The docking bay of human orbital platform Prometheus stretched before Vexthara and her delegation like a cathedral of impossible engineering. The commander had expected crude metal corridors and primitive atmosphere recycling systems. Instead, she found herself walking through a space that seemed to blur the lines between technology and artistry, where flowing organic curves integrated seamlessly with crystalline structures that pulsed with their own inner light. Her entourage consisted of Thysandra for scientific analysis, Zoranthak for security assessment, and historian Vex Karan, whose expertise in conquered species cultural development might prove invaluable in understanding what they were dealing with. All 4 Zephyrians moved with the cautious precision of predators entering unfamiliar territory. "Commander Vexthara," a voice called from ahead. "Welcome to Prometheus Station." The figure approaching them was unmistakably human, but subtly different from the specimens in Dominion archives. Taller, with an bearing that spoke of quiet confidence, and eyes that held depths of knowledge that seemed impossible for such a short-lived species. The human wore simple dark clothing that seemed to shift and adapt to the lighting conditions around them. "I am Director Chen, current administrator of this facility. Thank you for accepting our invitation." Vexthara's translator implant rendered the human's words in perfect Zephyrian, but she noticed the human was actually speaking her language directly, without any visible translation device. "Your linguistic capabilities are impressive," she acknowledged, her diplomatic training overriding her unease. Our records indicated your species had not achieved interstellar contact protocols at the time of our last survey. Director Chen's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in those dark eyes. We learned quickly, Commander. Necessity tends to accelerate education. If you'll follow me, there are some things we'd like to show you. They walked through corridors that defied Zephyrian understanding of space station design. The walls seemed to breathe with subtle movement, and Thysacendra's scientific instruments detected energy patterns unlike anything in Dominion databases. More disturbing still, the layout seemed to shift subtly as they moved, with passages appearing and disappearing in ways that made mapping impossible. Fascinating architecture, Vexacaran observed, his historian's mind cataloging details. The construction methodology appears to integrate biological and mechanical principles in ways we've never encountered. Thank you, Chen replied. We've had time to develop some unique approaches to engineering. Here we are. They entered a vast observation chamber with transparent walls that offered a panoramic view of Earth below. But what drew the delegation's attention wasn't the planet, but the dozens of massive structures visible in nearby orbit. Space habitats, manufacturing platforms, and defensive installations that dwarfed the world render. Before we begin our discussion, Chen said, we thought you should understand the scope of what you're dealing with. What you see here represents perhaps 1% of current human infrastructure in this system. Zurenthak's combat instincts were screaming warnings as his trained eye assessed the visible defenses. Energy projectors that could level continents, shield generators that could deflect asteroid impacts, and weapon systems based on principles his tactical training couldn't identify. How many survive? Vexthera asked, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. Currently? Approximately 40 billion humans across the Sol system, with another 8 billion in our extrasolar colonies. The numbers hit the Zephyrian delegation like physical blows. Their bioweapon had been designed to achieve complete planetary sterilization. The idea that not only had humans survived but had expanded to nearly 50 billion individuals challenged fundamental assumptions about Zephyrian military capabilities. Colonies? Tysendra whispered. Chen gestured to another wall display that lit up with a three-dimensional map of local stellar space. Dozens of star systems glowed with indicators showing human presence. We began interstellar expansion approximately 300,000 years ago, Chen explained with casual precision. Currently, we maintain active colonies in 47 star systems within a 100 light-year radius of Earth. Each system is fully self-sufficient and technologically independent. Vexcaran's legs nearly gave out. In her professional assessment of conquered species, she had never encountered a civilization that had achieved such rapid expansion after near extinction. Most species that survived Dominion bioweapons remained permanently crippled, their populations and technological capabilities forever stunted. How? Vexthara demanded. The Crimson Spore creates cascading biological failures that prevent recovery. No ecosystem should have been able to support population regrowth on this scale. Chen's expression grew more serious. Commander, you're thinking about this incorrectly. You assume that survival meant simply enduring your weapon and then rebuilding what was lost. That's not what happened. He manipulated a control interface, and the observation chamber's displays shifted to show historical data. Images of Earth during the initial bioweapon deployment filled the screens, showing the devastating cascade of ecological collapse that followed the Crimson Spore release. Your weapon was indeed effective, Chen continued. 97% of all life on Earth died within the first century after deployment. Forests became wastelands, oceans turned acidic, and the atmosphere became toxic to most carbon-based life. The images were exactly what Zephyrian doctrine predicted. Vexthera had seen similar results on dozens of worlds, the systematic destruction of biological systems that made planetary recovery impossible. But 3% survived, Chen said, and the displays shifted to show something that made no sense to the Zephyrian observers. Instead of small pockets of struggling survivors hiding in protected environments, the screens showed organized communities of humans working with purpose and coordination. They were building, expanding, and most impossibly, they were thriving in environments that should have been lethal. The survivors weren't just lucky, Commander. They were selected. Your bioweapon served as the ultimate evolutionary pressure. eliminating everyone who couldn't adapt to the new environmental conditions, and leaving only those whose genetic makeup allowed them to not just survive, but to flourish in the post-spore ecosystem. Lysandra's scientific mind reeled at the implications. That's not possible. Biological adaptation requires thousands of generations, and your species' reproductive cycle is far too slow for such rapid evolution. Chen smiled, and for the first time, there was something predatory in the expression. You're correct, under normal circumstances. But your bioweapon didn't just kill, it also introduced foreign genetic material into our biosphere. Material that our survivors were able to analyze, understand, and in some cases, incorporate. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the station's systems. The Zephyrian delegation stared at Chen with growing horror as the implications of his words sank in. You're saying your people adapted to our bioweapon by integrating it into your own biology? Vex Karan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Not exactly. We integrated the principles behind it. Your Crimson Spore was biological engineering on a scale we had never imagined possible. It took us approximately 50,000 years to fully understand how it worked, and another 100,000 to learn how to replicate and improve upon its design. Chen walked to another control panel, and the displays showed detailed molecular diagrams that made Lysandra's scientific instruments scream with overload warnings. What you see here are the current genetic modification standard to all human populations: radiation resistance, toxin immunity, pressure adaptation, extended lifespan, enhanced cognitive capacity, and about 47 other improvements that we've developed based on principles learned from your weapon. Zorinthak found his voice first. You turned our bioweapon into an enhancement tool? Eventually. It took time, and the cost was enormous. We lost entire generations while learning to understand and control the processes involved. But yes, Commander Zorinthak, your weapon became the foundation for our current biological capabilities. The tactical officer's mind was racing through the military implications. If humans had not only survived but had learned to enhance themselves using Zephyrian biotechnology, then every assumption about their capabilities needed revision. Show them the memorial, a new voice said from behind them. The delegation turned to see another human entering the chamber, this one noticeably older but carrying himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Unlike Director Chen's neutral demeanor, this newcomer's expression carried barely contained anger. Commander, this is Admiral Santos, our military liaison, Chen said with carefully controlled politeness. Admiral, these are our Zephyrian guests. Santos studied the alien delegation with eyes that had clearly seen too much war. Director Chen is being diplomatic, which is his job, but I think our guests should understand the full scope of what their people did here before we continue with pleasantries. Without waiting for Chen's approval, Santos activated another set of displays. The screens filled with images that made the Zephyrian delegation step backward in shock. Memorial sites stretched across vast landscapes, each marker representing not just individuals but entire family lines that had been extinguished during the bioweapon deployment. The scale was incomprehensible. Billions of graves stretching to every horizon, marking the greatest genocide in the known galaxy. 97% of 6 billion people, Santos said, his voice carrying the weight of 500,000 years of remembered grief. 5,820,000,000 human beings died because your people decided our world would make a nice addition to your empire. Vexed Hera felt something she had never experienced in 5 centuries of conquest. Guilt. The numbers had always been abstract, casualty reports filed and forgotten. Seeing the physical reality of what those numbers meant was overwhelming. Admiral, Chen said quietly, we agreed to approach this diplomatically. Diplomatically, Santos repeated with bitter humor. Director, these beings committed genocide on a scale that makes every other atrocity in galactic history look insignificant. And you want to be diplomatic. He turned back to the Zephyrian delegation, and his expression hardened. But here's what you need to understand. We didn't just survive your attack. We learned from it. We adapted to it. And we've spent 500,000 years making absolutely certain that nothing like it can ever happen again. The displays shifted again, showing defensive installations throughout the Sol system. Not just the orbital platforms they had already seen, but asteroid fortresses, deep space monitoring stations, and weapon systems that seemed to violate several laws of physics. Every approach vector to this system is monitored by automated defense networks that can track and destroy objects as small as a grain of sand moving at relativistic speeds. Santos continued, every planet and moon has enough firepower to sterilize fleets measured in thousands of ships, and every human settlement has enough independent defensive capability to survive the complete destruction of every other facility in the system. Zerinthek's professional assessment was that the visible defenses alone could destroy the entire Zephyrian fleet currently in the system without significant effort, but Santos wasn't finished. But the really important part isn't our defenses, Commander. It's our offense. Show them Project Prometheus. Chen's expression grew uncomfortable. Admiral, that might be premature. Premature? Santos laughed humorlessly. Director, they came here planning another resource survey. They were going to catalog our system for future exploitation, just like last time. I think they need to understand why that's no longer an auction. The displays cleared, then filled with images that made the Zephyrian delegation's previous shock seem insignificant by comparison. Deep space installations on a scale that dwarfed star systems, weapon platforms that could destroy planets from multiple light-years away, and worst of all, detailed intelligence files on dozens of Zephyrian worlds, complete with defensive assessments and strike plans. Project Prometheus has been operational for 200,000 years, Santos explained with cold precision. Complete intelligence on Zephyrian military capabilities, detailed mapping of your Empire's defensive networks, and strategic planning for full-scale warfare against your entire civilization. Vexthara's voice caught in her throat. You're planning to attack the Dominion? Santos met her eyes with an expression that held no mercy. Commander, we've been ready to destroy your entire empire for the last 200 millennia. The only reason we haven't is because we decided that genocide, even in revenge, diminishes the civilizations that commit it. He gestured to the memorial images still visible on some displays. But make no mistake, we remember every life you took, every family you destroyed, every future you stole from us. And we are fully prepared to ensure that the Zephyrian Dominion never again has the opportunity to commit genocide against any species, anywhere in this galaxy. The observation chamber fell silent, as the weight of 500,000 years of preparation, advancement, and barely controlled rage settled over the alien delegation. They had come expecting to find a dead world, or at most, a primitive species struggling to rebuild. Instead, they had discovered a civilization that had not only survived their greatest weapon, but had used it as the foundation for becoming something that could threaten the very existence of their empire. Director Chen gestured for the shaken Zephyrian delegation to follow him away from the memorial displays. Admiral Santos remained behind, his hostile presence a constant reminder of the genocidal history that hung between the two species like a poisoned atmosphere. I apologize for the Admiral's directness, Chen said as they walked through corridors that seemed to shift subtly around them. But his perspective represents a significant portion of human opinion regarding your people's return. Vexthara's diplomatic training was struggling to process the magnitude of what they had discovered. Director Chen, we need to understand the full scope of human capabilities. The information Admiral Santos showed us suggests military preparation on a scale that exceeds anything in our experience. Military preparation is only one aspect of our development, Commander. What I'm about to show you represents something far more significant than weapons systems or defensive installations. They entered what appeared to be a research facility, but one unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Scientists moved between workstations that seemed to grow from the floor itself, manipulating materials and energy in ways that defied conventional understanding of technology. This is our Applied Evolution Laboratory, Chen explained. Here we study and implement the biological and technological advances that have defined human development since your last visit. A figure approached them from across the laboratory space. At first glance, she appeared human, but the Sandra's enhanced sensors detected biological signatures that registered as impossible. The woman moved with fluid grace that suggested enhanced musculature. Her eyes held depths that implied augmented cognitive processing, and her skin seemed to shimmer with an internal energy that defied analysis. Commander, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez, our chief geneticist. Dr. Vasquez represents the current standard for human enhancement, roughly equivalent to what we call Generation 7 development. Dr. Vasquez smiled, and her expression carried an intelligence so profound that it made the Zephyrian delegation step backward instinctively. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that suggested vocal modifications far beyond simple communication enhancement. Welcome to Earth, Commander Vextara. Your species' contribution to our development has been invaluable. The casual way she referred to genocide as a contribution sent chills through the alien observers. Vasquez, perhaps you could explain to our guests the scope of human biological advancement, Chen suggested. The enhanced human nodded and gestured to a workstation that materialized from the laboratory floor in response to her approach. Certainly. Commander, what you're seeing here represents 500,000 years of directed evolution, accelerated by the biological principles we learned from your weapon. The workstation's displays show detailed genetic charts that made Thysasandra's scientific training seem primitive by comparison. Human DNA sequences that had been modified, enhanced and expanded to include capabilities that bordered on the impossible. Current human physiology includes resistance to radiation levels that would sterilize most worlds, immunity to virtually all known toxins and biological agents, and cellular regeneration capabilities that effectively eliminate aging as we previously understood it. How long do your people live now? Dr. Vasquez considered the question carefully. Individual lifespan is no longer a meaningful concept. Cellular regeneration, backed up by consciousness transfer capabilities, means that death has become a choice rather than an inevitability. Some of our oldest citizens have been alive since the original bioweapon deployment. The implication struck the Zephyrian delegation like physical blows. Humans who had personally experienced the genocide were still alive, still contributing to their civilization's development and presumably still harboring memories of what the Dominion had done. But biological enhancement is only one aspect of our advancement, Dr. Teol Vasquez continued. The more significant development has been cognitive amplification. She touched a control interface, and the displays shifted to show neural network diagrams that represented computing power on scales the Zephyrians couldn't comprehend. Standard human intelligence has been enhanced by approximately 4,000% compared to our pre-contact baseline. Memory is perfect and unlimited. Processing speed operates at quantum-level efficiency, and cognitive capacity allows for simultaneous analysis of complexity levels that would overwhelm your most advanced computer systems. Thysandra's instruments were detecting energy signatures from Dr. Vasquez's brain that suggested computational activity equivalent to a major planetary computer network. You're saying that individual humans now possess cognitive capabilities that exceed our most advanced artificial intelligence systems. Exceed them? No, Commander, we've incorporated them. Direct neural integration with quantum computing networks means that every human has access to the accumulated knowledge and processing power of our entire civilization. Chen stepped forward to elaborate. What Dr. Vasquez means is that the distinction between individual intelligence and collective intelligence has become obsolete. Every human can access the memories, skills, and knowledge of every other human while maintaining individual personality and decision-making autonomy. The concept was staggering. Zephyrian society was built on hierarchical knowledge distribution, with information carefully controlled and limited based on rank and function. A species where every individual had access to all accumulated knowledge would be impossible to control, predict, or defeat through conventional means. Show them the synthesis project, Dr. Vasquez suggested. Chen looked uncomfortable. Elena, that might be beyond their current understanding. Director, they need to grasp the full scope of what they're dealing with. Partial information will only lead to miscalculation and potential conflict. She manipulated her workstation controls, and the laboratory space around them began to shift and change. Walls became transparent, revealing vast chambers where human scientists worked alongside entities that registered as artificial constructs, but with complexity levels that suggested true consciousness. The synthesis project represents our most significant achievement, Dr. Vasquez explained. Complete integration between biological and artificial intelligence, creating hybrid entities that possess the creativity and intuition of biological minds, combined with the processing power and logical precision of quantum computing systems. Zorantak's tactical assessment was that they were looking at individual entities with cognitive capabilities that exceeded entire Zephyrian military command structures. Are these constructs autonomous? They're not constructs, Commander. They're the next stage of human evolution, volunteers who chose to transcend purely biological existence while retaining their humanity, their memories, and their individual identity. One of the hybrid entities approached their group, and the Zephyrians could see that while it maintained a recognizably human appearance, its body was composed of materials that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously: energy and matter, biological and artificial, individual and collective consciousness. I am Thomas Chen, the entity said, and Director Chen nodded with obvious affection. Director Chen's son, who chose synthesis approximately 12,000 years ago. The casual reference to a lifespan measured in millennia drove home the reality of what human development had achieved. These beings had personal memories spanning entire ages of galactic history. Thomas chose synthesis to work on our deep space exploration projects, Dr. Vasquez explained. His consciousness can distribute across multiple platforms simultaneously, allowing him to personally explore dozens of star systems while maintaining connection to Earth-based research. Thomas smiled at the alien delegation. I've been to 67 star systems in the past century, Commander Vexthara, including several Zephyrian worlds, though my presence there was undetected. The admission sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian observers. If humans had achieved undetected infiltration of Dominion space, then their intelligence on Zephyrian capabilities was far more comprehensive than Admiral Santos had indicated. You've been spying on our worlds? Vexthara demanded. Spying implies deception for hostile purposes, Thomas replied calmly. We've been gathering information to ensure that we could defend ourselves if your people decided to return with hostile intent, which, based on your ship's mission parameters, appears to have been a wise precaution. Dr. Vasquez gestured to another set of displays that showed detailed maps of Zephyrian space, complete with military installations, fleet movements, and what appeared to be real-time intelligence on Dominion activities. We've been monitoring your empire's expansion for the past 200,000 years, she explained. We know about every world you've sterilized, every species you've eliminated, and every military asset you've deployed. We've also been quietly contacting the survivors of your other conquests. The words hit the delegation like a cascade of system failures. If humans had been in contact with other species that had survived Dominion attacks, the implications for the Empire's security were catastrophic. Vex Karan's historian training kicked in. How many other species survived your encounters with the Dominion? Thomas manipulated reality around him, creating a three-dimensional map of local galactic space that showed dozens of star systems highlighted in various colors. 17 species achieved successful resistance to Zephyrian bioweapons, though none to the extent that humans did. 6 species achieved partial survival and required assistance to fully recover. 23 species were completely eliminated, but we were able to preserve genetic samples and cultural archives for potential future restoration. The scope of the intelligence network was overwhelming. Humans had been quietly building relationships with Zephyrian enemies across a significant portion of the galaxy, gathering allies and preparing for potential conflict on a scale that dwarfed anything the Dominion had imagined possible. You've been building an alliance against us, Zorantak said, his tactical mind finally grasping the full scope of the strategic situation. We've been building a coalition for mutual defense against genocidal expansion, Dr. Vasquez corrected. The distinction is important. We have no interest in conquering or eliminating the Zephyrian species. We have every interest in ensuring that you never again have the opportunity to commit genocide against other civilizations. Chen stepped forward, his diplomatic role reasserting itself. What Dr. Vasquez and Thomas are trying to explain is that humanity's development over the past 500,000 years has been focused on a single primary goal: ensuring that what happened to us never happens to anyone else. He gestured to the displays showing the coalition of survivor species. Every advancement we've made, every technology we've developed, every alliance we've built, has been directed toward creating a galaxy where species like yours cannot simply exterminate civilizations that pose no threat. Vexthara felt the weight of her empire's history pressing down on her like a physical force. The Dominion had built its power on the assumption that primitive species could be eliminated without consequence. The discovery that those genocides had actually created a coalition of advanced civilizations dedicated to preventing future atrocities was a strategic nightmare beyond calculation. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her diplomatic composure finally cracking completely. Thomas and Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances that suggested instant silent communication through their enhanced cognitive networks. "That," Dr. Vasquez said, "depends entirely on what you choose to do with the information we've shared. We're hoping that you'll help us convince your people that the age of genocidal expansion needs to end." The laboratory space around them shifted again, returning to its original configuration, but the weight of what they had learned hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "But," Thomas added with quiet intensity, "if you choose to report back to your superiors that Earth represents a threat to be eliminated, then you'll discover that the defensive measures Admiral Santos showed you represent only the most basic level of our current capabilities." The message was clear. Humanity had evolved far beyond anything the Zephyrian Empire could threaten, had built alliances that could challenge the Dominion across the galaxy, and possessed both the motivation and the capability to end Zephyrian civilization if they deemed it necessary. The question now was what Commander Vexthara would choose to do with this knowledge. The Zephyrian delegation was escorted to what Director Chen described as a consultation chamber, though the space defied conventional understanding of architecture. The walls seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and the ambient lighting appeared to respond to their emotional states, growing dimmer as their collective shock and fear intensified. "I need to contact my ship," Vexthara said, her voice carrying the strain of someone whose entire worldview had collapsed in the span of a few hours. "Of course," Chen replied. "Though I should mention that your communications will be monitored by our security protocols. Given the sensitive nature of what we've discussed, we need to ensure that any transmission to your vessel doesn't trigger unnecessary alarm." Zorinthak's combat instincts bristled at the casual assumption of human surveillance capabilities. "You're monitoring our ship communications?" Thomas, who had accompanied them from the laboratory, materialized more fully into the chamber. His hybrid nature allowed him to interface directly with the station's systems, making his presence both everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "Commander Zorinthak, we've been monitoring all Zephyrian military communications in this sector for the past several thousand years. Your ship's encryption protocols are based on mathematical principles we helped develop when we were studying the wreckage of your original invasion fleet." The implications sent another shock through the delegation. If humans had been intercepting Dominion communications for millennia, their intelligence on Zephyrian activities was even more comprehensive than previously indicated. Dysandra, who had been quietly analyzing the data they'd collected, finally spoke up. "The technological advancement you've described should be impossible within the time frame you've indicated. Even accounting for accelerated development pressures, achieving this level of sophistication would require fundamental breakthroughs that should take millions of years." Dr. Barry Pauls Vasquez, who had followed them to the consultation chamber, smiled with what might have been sympathy. "You're thinking about development in linear terms, Commander Thysandra. That's natural, given that most species advance through gradual accumulation of knowledge over generations." She gestured, and the chamber's walls displayed timeline graphs showing human advancement over the past 500,000 years. The curve wasn't gradual but exponential, with major breakthrough points occurring at regular intervals. Human development has been guided by what we call catastrophic acceleration principles. Each major crisis or challenge has resulted in fundamental leaps in capability rather than gradual improvement. The timeline showed the original bioweapon deployment as the first major acceleration point, followed by dozens of others. Natural disasters that had forced rapid technological development, resource shortages that had driven innovation, and contact with other survivor species that had shared advanced knowledge. But the most significant factor has been our approach to collective intelligence, Thomas added. Once we achieved neural networking capabilities, every breakthrough made by any individual human became instantly available to our entire species. He manipulated the timeline displays to show the exponential growth curve that had resulted from collective intelligence integration. When a single human makes a scientific discovery, that knowledge immediately becomes part of the cognitive baseline for our entire population. When we encounter new technologies from other species, every human can contribute to understanding and improving those technologies simultaneously. Vex Karin's historical training helped her grasp the implications. You're describing cognitive development on the scale of an entire planetary civilization working as a single research entity. Exactly. Imagine if every individual in the Zephyrian Empire could instantly share knowledge, skills, and insights with every other individual, while maintaining their unique perspective and creativity. The rate of advancement becomes limited only by the speed of thought itself. The chamber fell silent as the Zephyrian delegation contemplated the reality of facing a species where every individual possessed the accumulated knowledge and capabilities of their entire civilization. Vexthara activated her communication interface, establishing contact with the World Render. "This is Commander Vexthara to Ship Control. Status report." Her first officer's voice carried obvious relief. "Commander, we've been monitoring massive energy signatures throughout the system. Are you under threat?" "Negative, Quaxiron. We are in diplomatic consultation. Maintain defensive postures, but do not initiate any aggressive actions under any circumstances. That is a direct order." "Understood, Commander. Should we prepare for departure?" Vexthara looked around the chamber at the humans who had casually described capabilities that could eliminate her entire fleet without effort. "Not yet. Continue monitoring and await further instructions." Vexthara out. As the communication ended, Director Chen stepped forward with an expression that suggested sympathy for her impossible situation. "Commander, we understand the position this puts you in. Returning to your superiors with this information will likely result in military responses that would be catastrophic for everyone involved. What alternative do we have?" she asked. "My people need to know what they're dealing with. Your people need to understand that the galaxy has changed," Thomas corrected. "The age of uncontested expansion and genocidal conquest is ending, whether the Zephyrian Empire accepts that reality peacefully or learns it through more difficult means." Admiral Santos entered the chamber, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere toward barely controlled hostility. "Director, I've been reviewing our guests' ship communications. Their high command is expecting a routine resource survey report. If they don't receive it on schedule, follow-up fleets will be dispatched." The news sent visible tension through the human observers. Vexthara realized that her delegation's extended absence might be interpreted as evidence of unexpected resistance requiring military response. "How long before your superiors expect contact?" Chen asked. 7 standard cycles, Vexthara replied. "If we don't report by then, reinforcement protocols will be initiated." Santos exchanged glances with the other humans that suggested instant communication through their cognitive networks. "Reinforcement protocols involve how many vessels?" "Standard procedure calls for a combat reconnaissance fleet. Approximately 50 ships, including heavy assault platforms." The humans' expressions grew more serious. Thomas dematerialized and rematerialized several times in rapid succession, obviously accessing multiple information networks simultaneously. 50 Zephyrian warships represent significant destructive capability, he reported. While not a threat to our defensive systems, their arrival would likely escalate the situation beyond diplomatic resolution. Vasquez stepped forward with obvious concern. "Commander Vexthara, we need to find a solution that doesn't result in open warfare. Once military engagement begins, the political dynamics on both sides will make peaceful resolution exponentially more difficult." "What are you proposing?" Vexthara asked. Chen manipulated the chamber's displays to show communication logs and strategic assessments. "We'd like to invite a full diplomatic mission from the Zephyrian Empire to Earth, not military reconnaissance, but actual diplomatic contact between our civilizations." "That's impossible. The Dominion doesn't conduct diplomacy with primitive species." "Commander," Thomas said quietly, "you've seen our capabilities. You know that describing humanity as primitive is no longer accurate by any reasonable assessment." The weight of that truth settled over the chamber. Vexthara found herself in the impossible position of having to convince her superiors that a species they had once easily conquered had become something that could threaten the existence of their entire empire. Even if I could convince High Command to consider diplomatic contact, they would never agree to meet under circumstances where you hold all the advantages. she said. Santos spoke up with obvious impatience. Commander, let's be clear about something. We do hold all the advantages. The question is whether we use them constructively or destructively. He activated displays showing real-time monitoring of the world render and detailed intelligence on Zephyrian military capabilities throughout the sector. We could disable your ship, capture your crew, and send their testimonies along with documentation of our capabilities to your high command. We could infiltrate Zephyrian space and make direct contact with your leadership. We could intercept and redirect your expected resource survey reports. We have dozens of options that don't require your cooperation. The casual listing of capabilities that should have been impossible drove home the reality of humanity's technological advancement. If they could do all of these things, the Zephyrian Empire's security protocols were obsolete. But, Chen interjected with a warning look at the Admiral, we prefer to work with you rather than around you. Cooperation produces better outcomes for everyone involved. Dr. Vasquez added her perspective. Commander, what we're offering is an opportunity for your people to join the galactic community as contributors rather than conquerors. The alternative is discovering that they've become obsolete threats that need to be contained. Vextara realized that she was witnessing the end of everything the Zephyrian Empire represented. For 5 centuries, the Dominion had expanded unchallenged, secure in their technological superiority and military dominance. Now they faced a coalition of species that had not only survived their genocidal expansion, but had used those experiences to develop capabilities that made Zephyrian power insignificant by comparison. If I agree to facilitate diplomatic contact, she asked, what assurances can you provide that this won't simply delay inevitable conflict? Thomas materialized fully in front of her, his hybrid nature allowing him to project absolute sincerity through multiple communication channels simultaneously. Commander, humanity has spent 500,000 years preparing for this conversation. We've developed capabilities that could eliminate every threat in this galaxy, but we've chosen to use them for defense and alliance building instead of conquest and revenge. He gestured to displays showing the coalition of survivor species and their technological collaboration. We could have used our advantages to build an empire that surpassed the Zephyrian Dominion in every way. Instead, we've built a community of civilizations dedicated to mutual assistance and collaborative development. We're offering your people the opportunity to join that community. The chamber fell silent as Vextara contemplated a choice that would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the future of her entire species. Return to the Dominion with information that would likely trigger the largest military mobilization in Zephyrian history, or find a way to convince a genocidal empire that the age of conquest was ending. What exactly are you asking me to do? She finally said. Chen stepped forward with the expression of someone offering the only lifeline available in a storm. Help us arrange a meeting between human representatives and Zephyrian leadership under neutral circumstances. Give us an opportunity to demonstrate that cooperation serves everyone's interests better than continued conflict. And if my people refuse? Santos answered with cold finality. Then they'll discover that the species they once hunted has become something that hunts them. 3 months later, the neutral space station designated as Convergence Point 1 hung in the void between human and Zephyrian territories. A testament to engineering principles that neither species fully understood but both had contributed to creating. The structure itself represented humanity's most advanced construction techniques merged with Zephyrian resource management protocols, built specifically for this unprecedented diplomatic contact. Commander Vextara stood in the central conference chamber, watching through transparent walls as the most significant gathering in galactic history prepared to begin. The Zephyrian delegation included High Archon Zekthul, Supreme Military Commander of the Dominion, along with representatives from every major administrative and scientific division of the Empire. Across the chamber, human representatives included not just Director Chen and Admiral Santos, but beings like Thomas, whose hybrid nature challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness itself. More significantly, the gathering included representatives from 17 other species, each one a survivor of Zephyrian expansion campaigns, each one now allied with humanity in ways that redefined the political structure of the galaxy. Nervous, Commander? Asked Coordinator Yesazandri, a member of the Stellar Collective whose species had survived Zephyrian bioweapons through technological integration similar to humanity's biological adaptation. Terrified, Vexthera admitted. 3 months ago, I thought I was conducting a routine resource survey. Now I'm participating in negotiations that could determine whether my entire civilization survives the next century. Yasasandre's crystalline form shifted colors in what might have been sympathy. Fear is appropriate, Commander. What your people did to us was unprecedented in its scope and cruelty. But what humanity has built in response has given us hope that such atrocities might become impossible in the future. The observation struck at the heart of Vexthara's internal struggle. 3 months of intensive preparation for this gathering had forced her to confront the reality of what the Zephyrian Empire had become. Not the noble civilization of explorers and pioneers that Dominion propaganda proclaimed, but a machine for systematic genocide that had eliminated entire categories of life from the galaxy. Participants are requested to take their positions for formal proceedings, announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The station's artificial intelligence was another collaboration between species, possessing cognitive capabilities that exceeded any individual consciousness while maintaining perfect neutrality between factions. High Archon Zekthul entered the chamber with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His entourage included the most powerful military and political figures in the Zephyrian Empire, beings whose decisions had shaped galactic history for millennia. But Vexthara noticed something that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. They moved with obvious caution, even fear, when faced with the reality of what their former victims had become. The chamber reconfigured itself to accommodate the diverse physiological needs of all participants. Atmospheric zones, gravitational adjustments, and communication protocols adapted automatically to ensure that every species could participate fully in the proceedings. Director Chen stepped forward to address the assembly, his words translated simultaneously into dozens of languages by the station's systems. Representatives of the galactic community, we gather here to address a crisis that has shaped the development of intelligent life in this region for the past 500,000 years. The practice of expansion through elimination, pioneered and perfected by the Zephyrian Dominion, has reached a point where it threatens not just individual species, but the very concept of cooperative civilization. High Archon Zekthul's mandibles clicked with obvious irritation. Director Chen, the Dominion's expansion policies have been guided by principles of efficient resource utilization and strategic security. The claim that our methods represent a threat to galactic stability is unsupported by evidence. Thomas materialized in the center of the chamber, his hybrid nature allowing him to address all participants simultaneously through multiple communication channels. High Archon, perhaps we should review that evidence before proceeding with debate. The chamber's displays activated, showing detailed documentation of Zephyrian campaigns across the galaxy. Not the sanitized casualty reports that filled Dominion archives, but comprehensive assessments of the true cost of genocidal expansion. Species rendered extinct, ecosystems permanently destroyed, and technological potential eliminated before it could contribute to galactic development. Over the past 700,000 years, Thomas continued, Zephyrian expansion has resulted in the complete elimination of 437 intelligent species. The total death toll exceeds 1 trillion sentient beings. The numbers hung in the chamber's atmosphere like a physical weight. Even Vexthara, who had participated in multiple conquest campaigns, found herself shaken by the comprehensive scale of destruction her people had caused. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward with displays showing alternative development scenarios. Our analysis indicates that if those species had been contacted for cooperative development rather than elimination, the current technological and cultural advancement of the galaxy would exceed our present levels by approximately 2 orders of magnitude. She gestured to complex projections showing potential collaborative achievements across multiple fields of science. Instead of a galaxy where one species dominates through fear and destruction, we could have had a galactic community where hundreds of civilizations contributed their unique perspectives and capabilities to collective advancement. High Archon Zekthul's expression remained skeptical. Theoretical projections are interesting, but the Dominion's policies have been guided by practical necessities. Galactic resources are finite. Territorial expansion requires security considerations. Alternative approaches carry unacceptable risks. Admiral Santos rose from his position with obvious anger. Unacceptable risks? High Archon, your people committed genocide against 5 billion humans because you wanted our solar system's asteroid belt for mining operations. What risk could possibly justify that level of mass murder? The risk, Zekthul replied coldly, of allowing primitive species to develop technologies that might eventually challenge Dominion security. Prevention of future threats requires elimination of current risks. The response crystallized everything that had gone wrong with Zephyrian civilization. Vextara realized that her people had become so focused on preventing potential challenges to their power that they had become incapable of recognizing the value of cooperation and mutual development. Representative Korthvel of the Transcendence Coalition, whose species had survived Zephyrian attack through radical technological adaptation, projected his thoughts directly into the chamber's communication networks. High Archon, your prevention strategy has created exactly the threat you sought to avoid. Every species that survived your attempts at elimination has been forced to develop capabilities specifically designed to resist Zephyrian expansion. Instead of preventing challenges to your dominance, you have created them. The chamber's displays shifted to show the current military capabilities of the Survivor Coalition. Defensive systems that could neutralize Zephyrian bioweapons, stealth technologies that made detection impossible, and offensive capabilities that exceeded anything the Dominion could deploy. Thomas added his analysis with disturbing precision. The survivors represent less than 10% of the species the Dominion has encountered, but their combined technological and military capabilities now exceed those of the Zephyrian Empire by a significant margin. More importantly, Dr. Vasquez continued, we've established communication and cooperation protocols with dozens of species that the Dominion hasn't contacted yet. When you arrive at their systems expecting easy conquest, you'll find civilizations that have been preparing for your arrival for thousands of years. The implications were staggering. The Survivor Coalition had been systematically contacting and preparing unconquered species for potential Zephyrian expansion, creating a galaxy-wide network of civilizations ready to resist genocidal conquest. Vexthatara watched High Archon Zekthul's expression as the reality of the strategic situation sank in. The Dominion had spent centuries building an empire based on the assumption that they could eliminate threats before they became dangerous. Instead, they had created a galaxy full of species specifically adapted to resist everything the Zephyrian Empire represented. What are you proposing? Zekthal asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing. Chen stepped forward with what might have been the most important speech in galactic history. We're proposing an end to expansion through elimination and the beginning of development through cooperation. The Zephyrian Empire joins the galactic community as a contributing member rather than a conquering force. The Dominion would retain all currently held territories and populations under Zephyrian administration, Thomas added. But future expansion would be conducted through diplomatic contact and mutual agreement rather than military conquest. Dr. Vasquez activated displays showing the technological and cultural benefits available through cooperative development. High Archon, the advancement potential available through alliance with the Survivor Coalition exceeds anything achievable through continued conquest policies. Admiral Santos added the military perspective with characteristic directness. And if the Dominion chooses to continue genocidal expansion, the Survivor Coalition has both the motivation and the capability to ensure that Zephyrian civilization becomes a historical footnote rather than an ongoing threat. The chamber fell silent as the weight of the choice settled over the Zephyrian delegation. Continue the policies that had built their empire and face the unified resistance of species that had learned to surpass them, or abandon those policies, and join a galactic community that offered advancement beyond anything they had imagined possible. High Archon Zekthul looked around the chamber at representatives of species his people had tried to eliminate, species that had not only survived but had become something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of Zephyrian superiority. How can we trust that cooperation will serve Zephyrian interests better than our current methods? Thomas smiled, with an expression that held both forgiveness and warning. High Archon, you can't trust it. You can only choose between cooperation with equals and resistance from superiors. The silence stretched for several minutes before Zekthul responded with words that would reshape galactic civilization. The Zephyrian Dominion is prepared to discuss terms for joining this galactic community. As negotiations began that would transform the galaxy from a battlefield of extinction into a laboratory for cooperative advancement, Vexthara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Her routine resource survey had revealed that the species her people had tried to eliminate had not only survived, but had used the crucible of near extinction to forge something unprecedented in galactic history. The age of genocidal expansion was ending not through conquest or revenge, but through the simple recognition that cooperation produced outcomes that no single species could achieve alone. The nightmare the Zephyrian Dominion had created through centuries of systematic genocide had given birth to a dream of galactic civilization based on mutual respect, shared advancement, and the protection of diversity rather than its elimination. And at the heart of it all stood humanity, the species that had taken the worst thing the galaxy could inflict and transformed it into the foundation for something better than anyone had dared imagine. The 3% who had survived had become the architects of a future where survival meant not just enduring catastrophe, but learning from it in ways that ensured such catastrophes could never happen again. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in 500,000 years, that was a cause for hope rather than fear.